Texas, 1945. The transport truck arrived at Camp Huntsville carrying 18 German women prisoners, and the first thing they saw was Sergeant Patricia Wilson standing at the gate, uniform pressed, sidearm holstered at her hip, clipboard in hand. The women stared, then whispered among themselves in disbelief. In Germany, women didn't guard prisoners. Women didn't carry weapons. Women didn't hold authority over anyone, especially not over captured enemy personnel. One prisoner laughed nervously, assuming this was temporary, that real guards would arrive soon. What these women would learn about American female soldiers and about themselves would shatter every belief they'd carried across the ocean. The late afternoon sun hung low over central Texas, casting long shadows across Camp Huntsville's wire fences and wooden guard towers. Heat shimmered off the parade ground like liquid glass, and dust settled slowly in air that smelled of mesquite and distant rain. The facility had been converted from a training camp to house female prisoners of war, one of only a handful of such installations across the United States, as the war in Europe wound toward its inevitable conclusion. Sergeant Patricia Wilson was 28 years old, from Chicago, one of the Women's Army Corps officers assigned to manage the compound. She stood 5 feet 7 inches tall, carried herself with military precision that came from 3 years of service, and wore her authority with the comfortable confidence of someone who'd proven herself repeatedly in a role that many still considered experimental, at best inappropriate, at worst. She watched the transport truck approach, reviewed her clipboard with the manifest of incoming prisoners, and prepared for the reception procedure she'd conducted dozens of times. But she also knew, from experience, that German women prisoners often reacted with confusion or outright disbelief when confronted with female American guards, that the cultural disconnect required patience and firm establishment of expectations. The truck stopped. The rear gate opened. 18 women emerged slowly, blinking in the bright Texas sunlight, their bodies stiff from days of travel, their faces showing exhaustion that went deeper than physical discomfort. They wore prison-issue dresses, gray and shapeless, carried small cloth bags containing whatever possessions had survived confiscation and processing. They ranged in age from early 20s to mid-40s, captured in various circumstances across the European theater, classified as auxiliary military personnel or civilian detainees requiring secure custody. They formed a ragged line as instructed, and Wilson approached to conduct the initial roll call. But as she moved closer, she heard the whispers, saw the looks exchanged between prisoners, recognized a particular confusion that always accompanied this moment. One woman, tall and blonde with a scar across her left cheek, spoke in German to her neighbor. "Why is there a woman here? Where are the real guards?" Another responded, "Maybe she's just administrative. The actual guards must be inside." A third laughed, to sound nervous and uncertain. "Americans are so desperate, they're reusing their women as soldiers now. We heard rumors, but I thought it was propaganda." Wilson understood enough German to catch the gist of their comments. She'd heard similar reactions before, had learned to address them directly rather than letting confusion fester. She cleared her throat, waited until all eyes were on her, then spoke in carefully articulated English that her German pronunciation learned specifically for this duty made comprehensible. "I am Sergeant Patricia Wilson. I am the senior guard officer for this compound. I and my fellow officers will be responsible for your custody, your security, and your daily management. We are not temporary. We are not administrative support. We are your guards, and you will follow our instructions exactly as you would male guards at any other facility." The women stared. The silence stretched, heavy with disbelief and the particular cognitive dissonance that comes from encountering reality that contradicts fundamental assumptions about how the world works. The tall blonde, her name was Greta Hoffman, according to the manifest, finally spoke in broken English. "You carry weapon. You, woman guard. This is permitted." "This is required," Wilson replied. Female guards for female prisoners. We maintain the same standards, the same authority, the same protocols as any military police unit. Your gender doesn't make you less security risk. Our gender doesn't make us less capable of maintaining custody. Greta absorbed this, her expression showing the mental effort of reconciling what she was seeing with what she'd been taught about women as roles, about military structures, about the proper organization of society. In Germany, women had served the war effort certainly, in factories and auxiliary, roles in support positions, but never with weapons, never with direct authority over prisoners, never in roles that suggested they might be equal to men in domains traditionally reserved for male competence. In Germany, Greta said carefully, women do not do such work. Is not proper, not natural for women to have authority, to carry weapons, to command. Wilson nodded, understanding that this wasn't just surprise, but genuine philosophical disagreement, that these women carried beliefs about gender roles that made female guards seem not just unusual, but fundamentally wrong. In America, she said, women do many things. We serve in military. We hold positions of authority. We prove our competence rather than accepting that competence is determined by biology. You'll adjust to this reality, or you'll find your time here difficult. The choice is yours. The women were processed through the standard intake procedure medical examinations, assignment to barracks, explanation of camp rules, and daily schedules. Throughout, they encountered more female guards, more women in uniform carrying sidearms and clipboards, and the casual authority of people who de-earned their positions through demonstrated capability. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez conducted orientation in the main assembly hall, explaining the camp's organization, the work assignments, the expectations for behavior and cooperation. She was 31 from California, had worked as a school teacher before the war, and brought pedagogical skills to the task of managing prisoners who needed structure but also careful handling to prevent the kind of resentment that could turn into resistance. You will work, Martinez explained, speaking slowly so her English could be followed. In the laundry, in the kitchens, in maintenance tasks that keep this facility operational. Your labor is voluntary according to Geneva Conventions, but those who work receive small payments and additional privileges. Those who refuse will not be punished, but they will have less freedom and fewer amenities. She outlined the daily schedule: reveille at 6, breakfast at 6:30, work assignments from 7 to noon and 1 to 5, evening meal at 6, free time until lights out at 10. Sundays included no work assignments, time for rest or religious services, or whatever personal activities prisoners chose within security constraints. You will be treated fairly, Martinez continued. You will receive adequate food, medical care, protection from abuse. In return, we expect compliance with rules, respect for guards' authority, and behavior that doesn't threaten security or order. This isn't prison in the punitive sense. This is detention until war's end and repatriation. Your experience here depends largely on your choices. Throughout this orientation, the German women kept glancing at Martinez's sidearm, at the way she stood with unconscious confidence, at the fact that she was explaining protocols rather than deferring to male authority. The disconnect was visible in their faces, their body language, their whispered comments to each other. During the question period, a woman named Anna Fischer raised her hand tentatively. She was in her mid-30s, had been a nurse before military service, carried herself with the careful professionalism of someone accustomed to hierarchical medical settings. "Who is commanding officer?" she asked in hesitant English. "Who has final authority over camp?" "Colonel Morrison," Martinez replied. "But day-to-day operations are managed by myself and Sergeant Wilson, along with our staff. Colonel Morrison oversees multiple facilities. He's rarely here. We run this compound." Anna absorbed this, her expression showing calculation. "And if there is problem, dispute, emergency, situation requiring decision, you decide? Without consulting male authority?" We consult each other, consult our training, consult regulations. Gender doesn't determine whose judgment matters. Competence does. This answer seemed to disturb Anna more than reassure her. She sat back down, whispering to her neighbor, her face showing the particular discomfort of someone whose worldview was being challenged by simple facts that contradicted fundamental assumptions. The first days at Camp Huntsville were marked by constant small confrontations as German women tested boundaries, questioned authority, tried to navigate a system that violated their understanding of how gender and power should interact. In the laundry facility, Private Jennifer Cole supervised work assignments, directing prisoners to different stations, ensuring efficiency and safety. She was 24, from Virginia, had worked in textile mills before enlisting, knew industrial machinery, and brought practical expertise to the role. Greta Hoffman was assigned to the pressing station, using heavy industrial irons to press uniforms and linens. She worked slowly, deliberately, performing the task with minimal effort, while watching Cole with evaluative judgment. "You work faster," Cole said after observing this for an hour. "The standard is 40 pieces per hour. You're doing maybe 15. I am working adequate speed," Greta replied. "You have no right to demand more." "I have every right. I'm your supervisor. You'll meet standard production, or you'll lose work privileges." Greta set down the iron, crossed her arms, and stared at Cole with open defiance. "You are woman. I do not take orders from women. Bring male guard, and I will discuss standards with him." Cole felt anger rising but maintained professional composure. She'd encountered this attitude before, knew that responding emotionally would be interpreted as female weakness, proving the prisoner right. "There is no male guard. I am your supervisor. You have two choices: meet production standards or return to barracks and forfeit payment and privileges. Decide now." The standoff lasted nearly a minute, both women locked in contest of wills that had nothing to do with laundry and everything to do with competing beliefs about authority and gender. Finally, Greta returned to work, her movements still slow but slightly faster, her face showing resentment that would require time and different experiences to dissolve. Similar confrontations happened across the compound. In the kitchen, in the maintenance shops, in every context where female guards exercised authority, German prisoners tested boundaries, questioned legitimacy, tried to find the male authority they assumed must exist somewhere behind the facade of female supervision. Wilson addressed this pattern in a staff meeting that evening. The female guards gathered in the administration building, sharing reports about resistance, discussing strategies for managing prisoners who seemed genuinely unable to accept that women could hold power. "They've been taught their entire lives that women are subordinate," Lieutenant Helen Thompson observed. She was 35, the oldest guard on staff, had worked as a police officer before the war, and brought law enforcement experience to POW management. Their ideology, their culture, everything reinforced this belief. Seeing us in authority positions doesn't just surprise them, it threatens their entire worldview. "So how do we handle it?" Cole asked. "I can enforce rules, make them comply through consequences. But I can't make them believe we're legitimate." "We don't need them to believe," Wilson said. "We need them to function. Belief can come later, or not at all. But functioning following procedures, meeting standards, treating us with the same respect they'd show male guards, that's not optional," Martinez added. "But I think we also need to model something they haven't seen. Not just female authority, but female competence that's undeniable. Show them that we're better at this job than many male guards would be, that our supposed weaknesses are actually strengths in contexts requiring patience and psychological insight." Thompson nodded. "And we need to be consistent. Every time they test boundaries, every time they assume we'll defer to men or break under pressure, we prove them wrong. Not through aggression, but through steady professionalism that demonstrates we're not going anywhere, not handing them off to male supervision, not doubting our own authority. The breakthrough began with an incident that could have turned violent, but instead became teaching moment about capability and restraint. 2 weeks into their detention, a fight broke out in the barracks between two prisoners, Greta Hoffman and a younger woman named Sophie Weber. The conflict started over something trivial, a perceived slight, a comment misunderstood, but escalated quickly into physical confrontation, fueled by months of stress and powerlessness seeking outlet. Private Maria Santos was on barracks duty when the fight erupted. She was 23, from Texas, had 3 brothers, and grew up learning to hold her own in rough circumstances that had prepared her better than any training manual could. She moved toward the combatants, called for them to stop, received no response. Santos didn't hesitate. She stepped between the women, caught Greta's wrist as a punch was thrown, redirected the momentum, and dropped her to the floor with a control hold that immobilized without injuring. Sophie tried to continue the fight, and Santos controlled her with similar efficiency. Both women now restrained, breathing hard but unable to move. "You done?" Santos asked calmly. Both women stopped struggling, shocked by how quickly and completely they'd been controlled. They'd expected female guard to be weak, ineffective, perhaps frightened by violence. Instead, they encountered someone who could physically dominate them with technical skill that had nothing to do with aggression and everything to do with training and competence. Santos released them carefully, maintaining ready position in case they resumed fighting. But they didn't. They sat on the floor, staring at this small woman who'd controlled both of them simultaneously, their faces showing the particular confusion that comes from experiencing reality that contradicts every expectation. Other prisoners had gathered, watching. Santos addressed them all, her voice carrying authority that came from having just demonstrated capability beyond question. Fighting is not permitted. Disputes will be resolved through proper channels. Next time this happens, the consequences will include solitary confinement and loss of all privileges. We maintain order here. We enforce rules. Your compliance is not optional. She filed her report that evening, documenting the incident with professional precision. But the real impact wasn't in the paperwork. It was in how German prisoners discussed what they witnessed, how their whispered conversations began to acknowledge that maybe American female guards weren't just performing roles meant for men, that maybe competence really did transcend gender, that maybe everything they'd been taught about women's inherent weakness was propaganda rather than truth. Greta Hoffman approached Wilson 3 days after the fight, requesting permission to speak privately. They met in Wilson's small office, afternoon light filtering through windows that overlooked the compound yard where other prisoners moved through their daily routines. "I wish to apologize," Greta said in careful English, "for my disrespect, for my assumption that you and your officers are not true guards. I have been wrong about many things." Wilson nodded, appreciating the courage required to admit error, especially when error involved fundamental beliefs about how the world worked. "What changed your mind?" "Private Santos." Greta paused, choosing words carefully. "She controlled me and Sophie without effort, without anger, with only technique and confidence. In Germany, we are taught women are weak, emotional, unsuited for physical confrontation or authority. But Santos is not weak. You are not weak. The difference between what I was taught and what I see here, this makes me question everything. What were you taught exactly? About women's roles?" Greta considered the question, her face showing the effort of translating not just language, but entire worldview. That women serve by supporting men. That our strength is in home, in family, in creating conditions for men to lead. That women who seek authority or power are unnatural, trying to be something biology does not permit. That societies grow weak when women forget their proper place. And you believe this? Everyone believed this. The regime's propaganda said it constantly. The culture reinforced it. Women who challenged these roles faced criticism, isolation, sometimes punishment. Was not belief exactly, It was simply how things were, like gravity or weather. Not questioned because questioning seemed pointless. Wilson leaned back, recognizing opportunity to address not just Greta, but, through her, other prisoners who were listening to this conversation through whatever informal network they'd established. "Let me tell you about America's female guards," she said. "We volunteered for military service. We completed same training as male military police. We proved we could handle weapons, control prisoners, make decisions under pressure. Not because we're trying to be men, but because we're capable humans who happen to be female. Gender is just one characteristic among many. It doesn't determine what we can do. But in Germany, you were lied to. You were told comfortable stories about natural order and proper roles, because those stories served people who wanted to maintain power. Women supporting men's leadership isn't natural law. It's social structure that benefits those who created it. When we challenge that structure, when we prove women can lead and fight and command, we're not violating nature. We're exposing lies that were passed off as nature." Greta absorbed these words, her face showing the painful process of worldview dissolving under weight of contradiction. "If this is true, if women can do these things, then what else have I been told that is false? If the regime lied about women's nature, what about everything else? The superiority, the destiny, the righteousness of our cause? That's the question you need to answer for yourself," Wilson said quietly. "I can't tell you what to believe, but I can show you what's possible when people are judged by capability rather than by category. Watch us. Watch how we operate this camp, how we maintain security, how we make decisions. Then decide whether what you were taught matches reality." Over the following weeks, subtle shifts began appearing in how German prisoners related to their female guards. Not sudden transformation, the conditioning of years couldn't be erased by single incidents or conversations. But small acknowledgments, tentative respect, growing recognition that authority derived from competence rather than gender. Anna Fisher, the former nurse, began asking Martinez questions about American military structure, about how female officers were selected and trained, about whether they faced discrimination or skepticism. The questions came during medical rounds, casual inquiries that masked deeper curiosity about systems that operated so differently from what she'd known. "Do male soldiers respect you?" Anna asked one afternoon while Martinez supervised a routine health check. "Some do, some don't," Martinez replied honestly. "We face skepticism, certainly. Some men believe we don't belong in military, that our presence weakens discipline or effectiveness. But we prove ourselves through performance. And increasingly, even skeptics acknowledge we're good at this work. In Germany, such women would be criticized, called unfeminine, accused of abandoning proper roles. We get called those things here too. But we also get recognized for competence, promoted based on merit, given responsibilities that match our capabilities. The criticism doesn't define us unless we let it." Anna nodded thoughtfully. "I was nurse. This was acceptable women's work caring, supporting, serving. But I also managed ward, supervised staff, made medical decisions. The doctors often deferred to my judgment because I had more experience. Yet I could never be doctor, never have official authority, because I was woman. This was simply understood. Did you accept that limitation?" "I thought I had no choice. The system was the system. Women could push boundaries slightly, could be competent within permitted roles, but could not change fundamental structure." She paused, then added quietly, "Seeing you make me wonder what I could have been, what I could have demanded, if I had not accepted those limitations as natural." The most dramatic shift came in June, when a male prisoner from an adjacent compound attempted to escape and was caught by Corporal Rebecca Hayes. The incident happened at dusk, Hayes conducting perimeter patrol when she spotted movement near the fence line, recognized it as escape attempt rather than authorized activity. She pursued on foot, her conditioning from track competitions in high school giving her speed and endurance. She caught the prisoner within 200 yards, brought him down with proper takedown technique, secured him with handcuffs, and radioed for backup. The entire event took less than 5 minutes, executed with professional efficiency that left no room for the prisoner to resist or claim he been mistreated. Word of the incident spread through both compounds, male and female prisoners, hearing different versions but all emphasizing the same fact. A female guard had caught a male prisoner, had physically controlled him, had demonstrated capability that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. The German women discussed this for days. They'd been adjusting to female guards overseeing female prisoners, accepting that women could manage women, even if that arrangement seemed unusual. But female guard controlling male prisoner challenged deeper assumptions, suggested competence that transcended not just gender roles, but physical disparities they'd been taught made such dominance impossible. Sophie Weber, the young woman who'd fought with Greta, approached Wilson during evening recreation period. She was 26, had worked in a munitions factory before capture, carried herself with the nervous energy of someone who'd survived circumstances that had broken others. "The guard who caught the man," Sophie said in broken English. "She is small, not physically large. How did she overcome him?" "Training," Wilson replied. "Technique. Understanding that physical confrontation isn't about strength alone. It's about leverage, momentum, knowing where and how to apply force efficiently. She's practiced those techniques thousands of times. When the moment came, she executed without hesitation. In Germany, we are taught men are stronger, that women cannot overcome male resistance through physical means. Men are typically stronger in terms of raw muscle power. But fights aren't weightlifting contests. They're dynamic situations where training, speed, decision-making, and technical skill matter more than bench press numbers. A trained woman can absolutely control an untrained man. Corporal Hayes proved that. Sophie absorbed this, her expression showing the now familiar pattern of beliefs crumbling under factual weight. Everything I was taught about women's weakness, it was propaganda. Lies to keep us subordinate. Some of it was lies. Some was exaggeration of real differences. Men are on average larger and stronger, certainly. But on average doesn't determine individual capability. And even when physical differences exist, they can be overcome through skill, strategy, tools like weapons, or techniques that multiply effectiveness. The regime told you women couldn't do things we're demonstrating every day we can do. Ask yourself why they lied. By July, the dynamic in Camp Huntsville had fundamentally shifted. German prisoners no longer questioned their guards' authority, no longer assumed male supervision must exist behind the female facade, no longer tested boundaries based on gender-driven assumptions about weakness or illegitimacy. But more significantly, conversations among prisoners began exploring larger implications of what they were witnessing. If women could guard prisoners, could carry weapons, could exercise authority, what else had they been told about female limitations that was false? And if the regime had lied about gender, what about race? What about democracy? What about the righteousness of their cause and the inferiority of their enemies? Martinez organized discussion groups, voluntary attendance, no pressure, just opportunities for prisoners to process their experiences, to examine beliefs they'd held without questioning, to begin the difficult work of rebuilding worldviews that had been constructed on foundations of propaganda and lies. Greta Hoffman attended regularly, often leading discussions with the analytical rigor of someone who discovered that everything she believed required re-examination. She described her transformation in one session. "I arrived here believing American women guards were aberration, proof that America was desperate and disordered. I assumed we would be managed poorly, that security would be lax, that female guards would be incompetent or would defer to men for real decisions. Every one of those assumptions was wrong." She paused, her face showing emotion she would have suppressed months earlier. "You are not just competent, you are better at this work than many male guards I encountered in Germany." You maintain discipline without cruelty. You enforce rules without abuse. You exercise authority without needing to prove dominance through intimidation. These qualities, patience, psychological insight, ability to de-escalate rather than escalate, these are strengths, not weaknesses. But I was taught to see them as female deficiencies rather than capabilities. Anna added, I have been thinking about women I knew in Germany who were capable, intelligent, strong, but who were trapped in limited roles by ideology that claimed biology determined destiny. How many female doctors, engineers, leaders did we lose because we believed propaganda about natural limitations? How much did our nation suffer because we wasted half our population's potential? Another prisoner, Elizabeth Lang, spoke up. She'd been silent in previous sessions, but now she contributed. I worked in aircraft factory. Very technical work, precision assembly requiring mathematical skill and attention to detail. Many women did this work, proved we could handle complex tasks. But we were paid less than men, given no authority, told we were temporary wartime substitutes rather than real workers. After seeing the American female guards, I wonder what if we had demanded equality? What if we had refused to accept subordinate status as natural? The discussions ranged across topics, gender roles, propaganda techniques, how ideology shapes consciousness, what it means to rebuild identity after discovering that foundational beliefs were lies. Martinez facilitated carefully, aware that these conversations were therapeutic but also potentially destabilizing, that examining one's entire worldview could be psychologically dangerous without proper support. In August, Camp Huntsville received visitors a delegation of American women's organizations interested in military service and gender equity. Wilson conducted tours showing how the facility operated, explaining challenges and successes of all-female guard staff managing female prisoners. The German prisoners watched these tours with interest, seeing American civilian women engaging with military operations, asking informed questions, treated as equals by male officers who accompanied the delegation. The contrast with German culture was stark here, where women moving freely between civilian and military spheres, exercising judgment about policy and practice, assumed to be competent observers whose opinions mattered. One visitor, a journalist named Margaret Hayes, requested permission to interview prisoners about their experiences. Wilson arranged this carefully, making clear that participation was voluntary, that prisoners could decline or refuse to answer specific questions without consequences. Several prisoners agreed, including Greta, Anna, and Sophie. The interviews took place over several days, Hayes asking about their reactions to female guards, how these experiences compared to expectations, what they were learning about gender and capability. Greta's interview was particularly revealing. When I arrived, I laughed, she said. I thought American women guards were joke, proof that America was weak and disordered. Now I understand the joke was on me. I was believing lies about women's nature, about limitations that were social rather than biological. Seeing your female guards forced me to question everything I'd been taught, not just about women, but about authority, about competence, about the proper organization of society. Hayes asked, what will you take from this experience when you eventually return to Germany? Knowledge that women are capable of anything men can do, given opportunity and training. Understanding that subordination isn't natural, but is created through systems that benefit those who hold power. Determination to never again accept limitations based on category rather than on individual capability. She paused, then added, and shame. Shame that I believed lies for so long, that I participated in systems that oppressed women, including myself, that I required American guards to teach me what I should have known all along. The war in Europe had ended in May, but repatriation took months as bureaucracies processed millions of displaced persons and prisoners. The women at Camp Huntsville waited through summer and fall, their future uncertain, their homeland transformed by defeat and occupation into something they might not recognize. During these months of waiting, The relationship between guards and prisoners evolved beyond simple custody. Not friendship exactly, the power dynamics prevented that, but mutual respect, recognition of shared humanity, despite the circumstances that had made them guards and prisoners. Wilson found herself in late-night conversations with Greta, discussing not just camp operations, but larger questions about society and gender, and the work of rebuilding after ideologies collapse. These conversations were professional violations, perhaps, but they were also human connections that both women needed, that served purposes beyond the formal requirements of detention. "What will you do?" Wilson asked one evening in October, both women sitting outside the administration building while stars filled the enormous Texas sky. "When you go back to Germany?" "I don't know," Greta admitted. "Everything I knew is gone. My city destroyed, my job eliminated, my beliefs proven false. I must rebuild life from nothing, but I also must rebuild self from foundations up. That is more frightening than physical reconstruction. You'll survive. You've proven that. Surviving is not the same as living. I have survived detention, survived disillusionment, survived learning that everything I believed was propaganda and lies. But living choosing who to become rather than just enduring who I am, that requires courage. I am not certain I possess." Wilson was quiet for a moment before responding. "You've shown enormous courage already. Admitting you are wrong, questioning beliefs you'd held for decades, allowing your worldview to dissolve under factual weight that takes more courage than most people ever demonstrate. Building new beliefs on more honest foundations isn't harder than that. It's just the next step." Greta Hoffmann returned to Germany in November 1945, finding Hamburg reduced to ruins, but slowly rebuilding. She worked initially in reconstruction efforts, then transitioned to teaching as schools reopened and tried to educate new generations, without the propaganda that had shaped her own formation. She became advocate for women's equality, writing and speaking about her experiences at Camp Huntsville, about American female guards who'd shattered her assumptions about women's limitations. Her memoir, published in 1954, documented both her indoctrination under the regime and her gradual awakening in Texas, drawing connections between gender oppression and totalitarian ideology. "The same lies that told us women were naturally subordinate," she wrote, also told us that some races were inferior, that democracy was weakness, that violence in service of ideology was justified. Recognizing the first lie helped me recognize all the others. The female guards at Camp Huntsville didn't just oversee our detention. They facilitated our liberation from beliefs that had imprisoned our minds more thoroughly than any wire fence could imprison our bodies. She corresponded with Wilson for decades, letters exchanged on birthdays and holidays, updates about life's developments and challenges. In one letter from 1963, she wrote, "I often think about that conversation we had under the Texas stars, when you told me I'd shown courage in questioning my beliefs. At the time, I felt only shame and confusion. But now I understand that admitting error is the beginning of wisdom, that the courage to be wrong about important things is what enables growth. Thank you for seeing that in me before I could see it in myself." Patricia Wilson continued military service until 1952, when she left to pursue law degree at Northwestern University. She became attorney specializing in civil rights and gender discrimination, using legal tools to dismantle systems that limited women's opportunities. Her work contributed to important precedents about workplace equality, about women's access to traditionally male professions, about the principle that capability rather than gender should determine what people are permitted to attempt. In interviews about her military service, she always emphasized the German prisoners' courage in questioning their own beliefs. They arrived expecting male guards, assuming female guards were temporary aberration or proof of American weakness. We could have just forced compliance, made them follow rules without changing minds. But instead, we demonstrated competence so undeniable that their beliefs couldn't survive contact with reality. That approach showing rather than telling, demonstrating rather than demanding. That's how you actually change consciousness rather than just behavior. She remained in contact with several former prisoners, including Greta, Anna, and Sophie. They formed an informal network of women who'd been connected by circumstances of war, but who chose to maintain connection afterward, supporting each other through the difficult work of rebuilding lives and societies after ideological collapse. Camp Huntsville was decommissioned in 1946, converted to different purposes as the machinery of wartime detention was dismantled. But its legacy persisted in the women who served there and the prisoners who been challenged to reconsider everything they believed about gender and capability. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez wrote a training manual about managing prisoners through professional competence rather than through intimidation, about how female guards could succeed by demonstrating skills rather than by trying to match male guards' approaches. Her manual became standard reference in military police training, influenced how the military thought about gender and authority, contributed to gradually expanding roles for women in armed services. Private Maria Santos, whose physical control of fighting prisoners had helped shift the compound's dynamic, remained in military service for 30 years, eventually becoming the first female command sergeant major in the Women's Army Corps. She credited her experiences at Camp Huntsville with teaching her that competence speaks louder than any argument that demonstrating capability is more effective than defending it verbally, that the best response to doubt about women's abilities is simply excellent performance. That makes doubt look foolish. In Hamburg, decades later, there's a small museum documenting women's experiences during and after World War II. Among the exhibits is a section about Camp Huntsville, featuring photographs of female guards, testimonies from German prisoners about their experiences, copies of letters exchanged between guards and prisoners who became correspondents after repatriation. One display shows Greta Hoffman's memoir, open to a page describing her first day at Camp Huntsville, her disbelief at seeing female guards with weapons, her assumption that this couldn't be real or permanent. Below it is a photograph from 1963 Greta and Wilson meeting in Germany during Wilson's visit. Two women who'd been guard and prisoner, now standing together as colleagues, as friends, as people who helped each other, understand that the categories dividing humans are often less significant than the capabilities uniting them. The caption reads, "When German women prisoners encountered American female guards in 1945, they couldn't believe what they were seeing." What happened next changed not just how they understood detention, but how they understood themselves, their capabilities, and the lies they'd been told about natural limitations. The female guards at Camp Huntsville didn't just oversee prisoners. They facilitated liberation from ideologies that had imprisoned consciousness itself. The story endures in military training programs, in gender studies courses, in discussions about how ideology shapes beliefs about capability, and how those beliefs can be challenged through undeniable demonstration. The German women who arrived at Camp Huntsville, expecting male guards who assumed female guards must be temporary or weak or illegitimate, who gradually learned that their assumptions reflected propaganda rather than reality. They became examples of how humans can change fundamental beliefs when confronted with facts that contradict conditioning. But the story also reminds us that seeing is only the beginning. The female guards at Camp Huntsville didn't just exist. They performed with excellence that made dismissal impossible, that forced recognition even from prisoners, trained to believe women could undo what these women were obviously doing. Excellence in the face of doubt. Competence that doesn't argue, but simply demonstrates. Professionalism that proves capability through results, rather than through defending against skepticism. These were the tools that American female guards used to challenge German prisoners' beliefs. And these remain the tools that marginalized groups use to challenge systems that doubt their capabilities. The weapons the guards carried were real. The authority they exercised was legitimate. And the transformation they facilitated in prisoners who learned to question their own conditioning in systems that learned to judge competence. Rather than assuming limitations based on gender, the transformation was the most powerful weapon of all outlasting. The war that created the circumstances, continuing to influence how we think about capability and category, and the work of building societies that judge people by what they can do rather than by who they are. Sergeant Patricia Wilson carried a sidearm at Camp Huntsville, but her real weapon was competence so undeniable that it shattered beliefs that had seemed unshakable, proved that limitation is often constructed rather than natural, demonstrated that the most radical challenge to oppressive ideologies is simply living in ways that make those ideologies' claims look absurd. The German women arrived unable to believe what they were seeing. They left unable to believe what they'd previously accepted without question. And that transformation from certainty in lies to recognition of truth, that was the victory that mattered most, the one that would outlast all the military victories, the one that proved wars are won not just through defeating enemies, but through helping them defeat the ideologies that made them enemies in the first place.